The morning mist clung to the windows of the Riverside Community Museum as Louise Rose unlocked the heavy oak doors. At 42, she moved with deliberate grace, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing a simple navy cardigan over dark slacks. Nothing about her suggested anything more remarkable than a dedicated museum guide who genuinely loved sharing local history with visitors. She had worked at the museum for 3 years, ever since moving to the small town of Millbrook. The residents knew her as a quiet, reliable woman who could recite fascinating stories about their town's founding families and the old railway station that once connected them to the wider world. What they didn't know was that Louise Rose wasn't her real name, and her previous career had nothing to do with museums. The Riverside Community Museum occupied a converted Victorian mansion on Main Street, its wraparound porch and gingerbread trim making it one of Millbrook's most photographed buildings. Louise had grown genuinely fond of the place during her 3 years there. The creaking hardwood floors, the way morning light filtered through stained glass windows, the musty smell of old books and preserved artifacts. It all felt remarkably authentic after years of carefully constructed false identities. "Morning, Louise," called Tom Bradley, the elderly security guard, as he made his rounds. Tom was 73, a retired mechanic who had taken the part-time position more for the company than the modest paycheck. His wife had passed 2 years ago, and the museum gave him somewhere to go where people appreciated his stories about Millbrook's automotive history. "Morning, Tom. How's that shoulder feeling today?" Louise asked, noting the slight stiffness in his movements that indicated his arthritis was acting up. "Oh, you know how it is. Some days better than others. Weather's changing." He paused to adjust his security badge, a gesture Louise had learned meant he wanted to chat. "Expecting a busy day?" "The school group from Westfield is coming at 10, she replied, checking her schedule. 25 third graders learning about the Civil War exhibit." Tom chuckled, his weathered face creasing with genuine amusement. "Better you than me. Those kids have more energy than a power plant. Remember last month when that one boy tried to climb into the covered wagon display?" Louise smiled genuinely. She actually enjoyed the school visits more than any other part of her job. Children asked the most interesting questions, unfiltered by adult assumptions and social conventions. Yesterday, a 7-year-old named Emma had wanted to know why the soldiers in the Civil War photographs looked so serious. "Didn't they ever smile back then?" the girl had asked, her small face scrunched with genuine curiosity. Louise had explained about long exposure times and the formal nature of early photography. But the question had stayed with her. In her previous life, she had rarely had time to consider such innocent observations about human nature. The museum's main floor housed the permanent exhibits: Native American artifacts from the local Mohawk tribe, displays about the Underground Railroad's route through the area, and a comprehensive collection documenting the town's role in the lumber industry. Louise had memorized every item, every story, every historical connection. What had started as cover research had evolved into genuine fascination. She unlocked the gift shop register and began her opening routine, checking that the security system had properly monitored the building overnight. Everything appeared normal. Motion sensors showed only Tom's authorized movements. Temperature controls had maintained proper conditions for the artifacts, and the humidity levels were within acceptable ranges. Louise had suggested most of these security improvements during her first month, claiming an interest in museum best practices. In reality, she was ensuring that if anyone tried to break in, she would know immediately. Old habits from her previous career died hard. At 8:30, Mrs. Henderson arrived for her volunteer shift. Margaret Henderson was 68, a retired teacher who had moved to Millbrook 5 years ago to be closer to her daughter's family. She possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of local genealogy and spent most of her time helping visitors research their family histories. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Henderson called as she hung her coat in the small office behind the front desk. I see we have the Westfield children coming today. Should I prepare the activity sheets? That would be wonderful. I was thinking we could do the artifact identification game after the tour. Mrs. Henderson beamed. She had developed the activity game herself, creating laminated cards with pictures of museum pieces that children could match to items in the displays. It was educational and kept young hands busy. Oh, I nearly forgot, Mrs. Henderson said, pulling a small, wrapped package from her purse. My granddaughter made these cookies for you. She insists you're her favorite museum person. Louise accepted the package with genuine warmth. 8-year-old Jenny Henderson had visited the museum dozens of times, always gravitating toward the Native American exhibit. She had a particular fascination with the beadwork displays and had started making her own jewelry using techniques Louise had described. Please tell her I said thank you. I'll save them for my lunch break. The morning proceeded peacefully as Louise prepared for the day's visitors. She reviewed her notes for the school tour, though she could have given it from memory. She checked that the interactive displays were working properly and ensured that all the lighting was optimal for photography. Several of the Westfield teachers liked to document their field trips for the school newsletter. At 9:15, the first unusual event occurred. A man in an expensive charcoal suit approached the front entrance, moving with a precision that immediately caught Louise's attention. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with dark hair graying at the temples and the kind of posture that spoke of military training. His shoes were Italian leather, recently polished, and his briefcase appeared to be genuine alligator skin. Everything about him was wrong for Millbrook. Their visitors typically wore casual clothes appropriate for walking through historical displays. Tourists might dress up slightly, but nothing approaching this level of formality. Local business people knew the museum well enough to visit in comfortable attire. Louise maintained her helpful museum guide expression as he approached her information desk, but internally, every instinct from her previous career had sharpened to full alert. Good morning, he said, his voice carefully modulated to suggest casual interest. I'm looking for information about local historical records, specifically documents related to families who settled here in the 1940s. His accent was difficult to place, possibly Midwestern, but with inflections that suggested he had spent time in other regions. Louise's ear for languages, trained through years of international operations, detected something deliberately constructed about his speech patterns. We have extensive genealogical records in our research library, Louise replied, gesturing toward the archives room. What family name are you researching? The man paused for exactly 1 second before answering, long enough to suggest he was choosing his words carefully. Harrison, he replied, watching her face with the kind of attention that most people reserved for movie screens. Louise's expression didn't change, but internally, every alarm system from her previous life began ringing at maximum volume. Harrison wasn't just a random surname. It was one of her former deep-cover identities, used during a particularly sensitive operation in Eastern Europe 15 years ago. The identity had been burned and retired after the mission's completion. No one should have known about it except for a very small circle of intelligence professionals. The coincidence was mathematically impossible. Let me check our database, she said, turning to her computer with the same helpful efficiency she showed every visitor. While appearing to search through genealogical records, she discreetly activated a small device hidden beneath her desk drawer. If anyone was using electronic surveillance to monitor her location or communications, they would now receive confused and contradictory signals. The device was one of several precautions she had installed during her first week in Millbrook. To anyone observing, it would appear that the museum's Wi-Fi was experiencing technical difficulties. I'm not finding any Harrison family records from that specific time period, she told him truthfully. The museum's database was comprehensive, and she had verified this while running her search. You might want to try the county courthouse about 12 blocks from here. They maintain more complete property and settlement records. The man smiled, but Louise noticed that the expression never reached his eyes. His pupils dilated slightly, a micro-expression that suggested stress or deception. "Thank you for your help," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. Louise's hand moved imperceptibly closer to the drawer that contained her emergency communications equipment, but he only withdrew a business card. The card identified him as Robert Chen, historical research consultant with a Chicago address and professional contact information. The cardstock felt expensive, with raised lettering and a subtle watermark. However, Louise's trained eye noticed that the typography was slightly inconsistent, a sign of high-quality forgery rather than legitimate business printing. "If you think of anything else that might be helpful, please don't hesitate to call," he said, placing the card on her desk with deliberate precision. After he left, Louise continued her normal routine, but with every sense heightened to full operational awareness. She completed her opening checklist, greeted Mrs. Henderson when she arrived, and prepared materials for the school visit. To any observer, she appeared unchanged. During her lunch break, Louise made her way to the small park behind the museum, ostensibly to eat her sandwich while enjoying the crisp autumn air. The park contained a few picnic tables, a small playground, and a walking path that connected to the old railway trail. It was a popular spot for families and offered clear sightlines in multiple directions. Louise sat at her usual table and unwrapped her lunch with apparent casualness. In reality, she was conducting a systematic surveillance check of her environment. A woman with short blonde hair sat on a bench approximately 40 yards away, apparently absorbed in reading a paperback novel. Her position provided an unobstructed view of both the museum's rear exit and the path Louise had taken to reach the park. The woman had been reading the same page for the past 10 minutes. Near the playground, a man in work clothes was ostensibly repairing a light fixture that had shown no signs of malfunction during Louise's previous visits to the park. His tool selection was appropriate for electrical work, but his technique suggested unfamiliarity with the equipment. More tellingly, he had positioned himself to observe the museum's main entrance and the street approaches. Louise finished her sandwich methodically while cataloging additional details. A delivery van had been parked across from the museum when she arrived at work that morning. The same van remained in position, despite the fact that most delivery services in Millbrook completed their routes before noon. 3 people conducting surveillance was significant. It suggested a professional operation with substantial resources. Louise's mind began calculating possibilities and preparing contingencies. She returned to work displaying the same calm demeanor that had characterized her 3 years in Millbrook. Whatever was developing, she needed more information before taking any action that might compromise her cover or endanger innocent civilians. The afternoon brought the promised school group from Westfield Elementary. 25 energetic 8- and 9-year-olds spilled out of a yellow school bus, accompanied by 2 teachers and several parent volunteers. Louise watched them approach with genuine pleasure, despite the morning's concerning developments. "Welcome to the Riverside Community Museum," she called out as they gathered on the front steps. "My name is Miss Louise, and I'm going to be your guide today. Who's excited to learn about history?" A forest of small hands shot into the air, accompanied by enthusiastic cheering. Louise couldn't help but smile genuinely at their excitement. She led them through the museum's main exhibits, adapting her usual tour to accommodate their attention spans and interests. In the Native American section, she demonstrated how different tribes had used local materials to create tools and artwork. The children were fascinated by the beadwork displays, and several asked if they could try making similar jewelry. The people who made these pieces had to be very patient, Louise explained, pointing to an intricate ceremonial necklace. Each bead was placed individually, and some of these designs took months to complete. A boy named Marcus raised his hand. How did they know what colors to use? Excellent question. Different colors had different meanings. Blue often represented the sky or water, red could symbolize strength or courage, and white frequently meant peace or purity. In the Civil War exhibit, the children studied uniforms, weapons, and field equipment with intense curiosity. Louise explained how soldiers had lived during long campaigns, what they ate, and how they communicated with their families. "Miss Louise," asked a girl named Sarah, "were there any lady soldiers?" That's a wonderful question. Officially, women weren't allowed to serve as soldiers during the Civil War. But some brave women disguised themselves as men so they could fight for causes they believed in. They had to be very clever and very brave. Louise found herself thinking about her own years of operating under false identities, though obviously she couldn't share those experiences with 8-year-olds. The tour continued through the industrial history section, where the children learned about Millbrook's lumber mills and the workers who had built the town's economy. Louise demonstrated how a water wheel worked and explained the importance of the river for transportation and power. "Everything in this town was connected," she told them. "The trees, the river, the railway, the people, they all worked together to build the community we have today." After the formal tour, Mrs. Henderson distributed her activity sheets, and the children scattered throughout the museum to find items that matched their assignment cards. Louise supervised, answering questions and helping younger students who struggled with reading. "Miss Louise," called Danny, a boy with freckles and an infectious grin, "how do you know so much about everything?" The question was innocent, but it struck Louise more deeply than the child could have imagined. "I read a lot of books," she answered, which was true, though it wasn't the complete truth. She had indeed read extensively during her years in intelligence work: technical manuals, cultural studies, historical analyses, and language primers. But her knowledge came primarily from fieldwork in dozens of countries, from operations that had required her to understand everything from medieval architecture to modern weapons systems. As the school group prepared to leave, another stranger appeared at the museum's entrance. This one made no pretense of being a casual visitor. She was approximately 35, with auburn hair pulled back severely and wearing a dark suit that practically announced federal law enforcement. FBI agent Sarah Martinez approached Louise directly, showing her credentials with the kind of professional courtesy that suggested she knew exactly who she was addressing. "Ms. Rose, I'd like to speak with you privately about a matter of national security." Louise glanced around the museum, noting that Tom was conveniently absent, probably taking his afternoon break in the small staff room, and Mrs. Henderson was busy helping the last of the children complete their activity sheets. "Of course, Agent Martinez. We can use the conference room." The conference room was located on the museum's second floor, accessible through a narrow staircase that creaked with each step. The room itself was small and cramped, lined with framed photographs of Millbrook's past mayors, town festivals, and historical events. A scarred wooden table dominated the space, surrounded by mismatched chairs that had been donated by various local businesses over the years. Agent Martinez sat across from Louise, her posture professional but not hostile. She placed a tablet and a small recording device on the table, then looked directly at Louise with intelligent brown eyes that suggested extensive experience in reading people. "Ms. Rose, we have reason to believe someone may be targeting you in connection with your previous employment." Louise maintained the same puzzled expression she had perfected during her years of cover work. She folded her hands in her lap and tilted her head slightly, the picture of a confused, small-town museum employee. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. My previous employment was with the State Tourism Board in Albany. I can't imagine why that would interest federal agents." Agent Martinez studied her carefully, noting micro-expressions and body language with the trained eye of someone who had conducted thousands of interviews. "We know about your work with the Strategic Intelligence Division, Louise. Or should I say, Agent Catherine Walsh?" Louise kept her breathing steady and her expression unchanged, though internally she was rapidly assessing the situation. The Strategic Intelligence Division was a highly classified program that officially didn't exist. For an FBI agent to know about it suggested either a significant security breach or authorization from the highest levels of government. "I think you may have me confused with someone else," Louise replied calmly. "I've never heard of any Strategic Intelligence Division." Agent Martinez opened her tablet and turned it toward Louise, displaying a series of photographs and documents. 3 years ago, Agent Catherine Walsh disappeared after completing Operation Silent Harbor. She was officially declared missing, presumed dead, after her extraction team failed to locate her following a compromised mission in Eastern Europe. The photographs showed a woman who bore a strong resemblance to Louise, but with darker hair and different facial features. However, the bone structure and general build were unmistakably similar. "Our facial recognition software flagged Louise Rose when you applied for your museum position," Martinez continued. "The match probability was 94.7%, even accounting for the cosmetic alterations." Louise realized she was at a crossroads. She could continue to maintain her cover and risk whatever threat had brought federal agents to Millbrook, or she could acknowledge her identity and potentially expose the carefully constructed life she had built over the past 3 years. "Agent Martinez," she said carefully, her voice taking on a slightly different tone. "Assuming hypothetically that you're correct about my identity, what exactly is the threat you mentioned?" Martinez leaned forward, recognizing the subtle shift in Louise's demeanor. "The arms dealer network you helped dismantle during Operation Silent Harbor has regrouped. They've spent 3 years and considerable resources looking for the agent who cost them over $50 million in seized assets and disrupted their operations across 4 countries. We believe they've found you." Louise processed this information while maintaining her outward calm. The Silent Harbor operation had been one of her most successful missions, resulting in the arrest of dozens of criminals and the seizure of weapons that would have been used in terrorist attacks across Europe and North America. "What kind of time frame are we looking at?" she asked, her question confirming Martinez's suspicions about her identity. "The consultant who visited you this morning? His real name is Markus Volkov. He's a former Spetsnaz operative who now works as a freelance intelligence gatherer for various criminal organizations. We believe he was testing you, seeing if you would react to mention of the Harrison identity." Louise nodded slowly. Volkov's name was familiar from intelligence briefings during her active years. He was known for his patience and methodical approach to target identification. "How many of them are in town?" she asked. "We've identified at least 6 individuals with connections to the network. They've been arriving gradually over the past week, establishing positions and gathering intelligence about your routines." Louise stood and walked to the conference room's single window, which provided a view of Main Street and the surrounding neighborhood. From this angle, she could see the delivery van that had been in position all day, as well as the work crew that had been making suspiciously slow progress on a street repair project. "How many agents do you have in town?" she asked, without turning around. "Just me, officially. This is still classified as an intelligence-gathering operation. My superiors wanted to assess the situation before committing additional resources." Louise turned back to Martinez, her expression thoughtful. "Agent, I appreciate your concern, but I think you're overestimating the threat level. These people are criminals, not military strategists. If they wanted to eliminate a retired agent, they wouldn't announce themselves so obviously." "Then what do you think they want?" Louise sat back down, her analytical mind working through possibilities and probabilities. "Information. something they think I know or have access to. The question is, what could be worth this level of risk and exposure? Martinez pulled up additional files on her tablet. These individuals have all been spotted in your area over the past week. She showed Louise several surveillance photographs taken with telephoto lenses. Do you recognize any of them? Louise studied the faces carefully. Two were unfamiliar, though their bearing and positioning in the photos suggested professional training. The third photograph made her pause, her composed expression flickering for just a moment. Elena Vasquez, Louise said quietly. She was an informant during the Silent Harbor operation. We thought she was dead. So did I. Louise's mind raced through implications and possibilities. Elena had been a valuable asset during the operation, providing crucial intelligence about the network's structure and operations. Her apparent death had been one of the operation's few casualties. If Elena is alive and she's here, then this isn't about revenge, Louise continued. She knows something about the network that she's never shared with anyone. Agent Martinez frowned, making notes on her tablet. What could be worth this much risk and exposure? Louise walked to a filing cabinet that stood against the conference room's far wall. She withdrew a key from beneath the bottom drawer and unlocked a hidden compartment that she had installed during her first week at the museum. From the compartment, she removed a small waterproof case, similar to those used by military personnel to protect sensitive documents in hostile environments. During Silent Harbor, I recovered more than just evidence of arms dealing, Louise explained, setting the case on the table. There were financial records showing connections to several high-ranking government officials, including some who were still in active service at the time. Agent Martinez stared at the case with growing understanding. You kept copies. I kept copies as insurance. The network had tentacles reaching deep into multiple governments. I wasn't sure who could be trusted with information of this magnitude. Louise's fingers drummed against the table as she considered her next words. I planned to eventually turn these over to the appropriate authorities, but then the opportunity to disappear presented itself. This is what they're after. Louise nodded. Probably. But they can't simply take the files by force. The encryption I used requires biometric confirmation every 72 hours, or the data auto-deletes. They need me alive and cooperative. So they're not here to eliminate you. They're here to recruit me, Louise confirmed, or at least to convince me that cooperation is in my best interest. As if summoned by their conversation, Louise's cell phone began ringing. The number displayed was local, but Louise didn't recognize it. She looked at Martinez, who nodded, then answered with her standard museum greeting. Millbrook Museum, Louise speaking. Hello, Catherine. The voice was familiar, speaking with a slight Eastern European accent that Louise remembered from long conversations in safe houses and surveillance positions. It's been a long time. Elena? Louise kept her voice neutral, giving no indication of surprise or recognition. I thought you were dead. As you can see, reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. We need to talk. I'm at work. After hours, then. The old railway bridge at sunset. Come alone, and Catherine, bring what we both know you have. The line went dead. Louise set down her phone and looked at Martinez, who had been recording the conversation. Well, that simplifies things, Louise said. They want a meeting. You can't seriously be considering going. Louise smiled for the first time since their conversation began. Agent Martinez, I spent 15 years in situations that most people couldn't imagine surviving. A meeting with a former informant is hardly the most dangerous thing I've done. But you'll have backup? Of course, though it might not be the kind you're expecting. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly as Louise completed her normal duties while mentally preparing for the evening's confrontation. She helped Mrs. Henderson with research requests from visitors, updated the museum's inventory database, and locked the valuable artifacts in their security cases. To any observer, she appeared to be following her usual routine. In reality, she was conducting final surveillance checks and making subtle preparations that would have been invisible to anyone without intelligence training. At closing time, Louise bid goodbye to Mrs. Henderson and Tom, giving no indication that anything unusual was planned for the evening. She locked the museum's doors and walked to her car with the same relaxed gait she displayed every day. However, instead of driving directly home to her small apartment above the bookstore, Louise made several seemingly random turns through Millbrook's residential streets. Anyone attempting to follow her would have found the route confusing and inefficient. After confirming that she wasn't being actively surveilled, Louise drove to a storage unit on the outskirts of town. The facility was older and less secure than modern installations, but it served her purposes perfectly. Unit 247 contained items that Louise Rose, museum guide, would never need. However, Agent Catherine Walsh had always believed in thorough preparation. She changed from her museum attire into dark jeans, hiking boots, and a jacket with multiple concealed pockets. Her movements were efficient and purposeful, revealing muscle memory from a different life. From a locked case, she selected equipment that definitely hadn't come from any museum supply catalog: a compact communication device, night vision equipment, and several other items that would have surprised anyone who knew only Louise the museum guide. Agent Martinez watched from a discreet distance as Louise made her preparations. The FBI agent had positioned herself to observe the storage facility while maintaining communication with federal backup teams stationed around Millbrook. "Where did you get all this?" Martinez asked when Louise emerged from the storage unit. "I may have retired from active duty, but I never stopped being prepared," Louise replied, testing her communication device. Old habits. The railway bridge stood at the edge of Millbrook, spanning Miller's Creek in a location that had once been crucial for the town's transportation infrastructure. The original wooden bridge had been replaced with steel and concrete in the 1950s, but the structure retained its historical character. The bridge provided an excellent meeting location from a tactical perspective: multiple approach routes, clear sight lines in all directions, and enough ambient noise from the creek to mask quiet conversations. As Louise approached on foot in the fading light, she could see Elena's silhouette against the sunset. Elena Vasquez looked older than Louise remembered, more worn by whatever experiences had filled the 3 years since Silent Harbor. The confident informant had been replaced by someone who constantly looked over her shoulder. "You look well, Catherine. Small-town life agrees with you." "It's Louise now. And yes, it does." Elena smiled sadly, and Louise noticed that her former informant was carrying a small backpack and appeared to be traveling light. "I've missed our conversations. You were always refreshingly direct." "What do you want, Elena?" "The same thing you want: to end this." Elena gestured toward the darkening woods around the bridge. "The network we thought we destroyed? It rebuilt itself, stronger, more careful, more connected than before. They've been hunting both of us." Louise kept her hands visible but ready, noting Elena's positioning and watching for signs of additional personnel in the area. "Both of us? I thought you were working with them." "I was captured 3 days after Silent Harbor concluded," Elena said, rolling up her sleeve to reveal scars that told a story of prolonged interrogation. "They kept me alive because they thought I knew where you had gone and what evidence you had taken with you when you disappeared." The scars were extensive and consistent with the techniques used by professional interrogators. Louise felt a flicker of guilt for assuming Elena's betrayal when she had actually been another victim of the network's brutality. "I've spent 3 years convincing them that I knew nothing useful," Elena continued. 3 years of playing the broken informant who had given them everything during my initial capture. And now? Now they found you anyway, but they still need what you took. Elena stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Catherine, Louise, they're not just criminals anymore. They have government contracts, military connections, corporate partnerships. The arms dealing was just the beginning. Louise absorbed this information while maintaining her tactical awareness. She could detect movement in the woods on both sides of the creek, positioned to cut off escape routes, but not yet moving to surround the bridge. What are you proposing? Elena's expression hardened with desperate resolve. Give them the files, all of them, everything you took from Silent Harbor. In exchange, they disappear from your life forever. No more hunting, no more threats, no more disruption of whatever peace you found here. You know I can't do that. Then a lot of innocent people in this town are going to get hurt, Elena replied, her voice carrying genuine regret. They're not interested in subtle approaches anymore, Catherine. Too much time has passed. Too many resources have been invested. From her position on the bridge, Louise could now clearly see movement in the woods. At least 6 figures, positioned with military precision to control all approach and escape routes. How many? Louise asked quietly. Enough, Elena replied. They wanted to make sure you understood that this isn't a negotiation. Louise sighed, appearing to consider the ultimatum while actually calculating distances, timing, and tactical options. Her years of experience in hostile situations had taught her to think several moves ahead. Elena, in all the time we worked together during Silent Harbor, did you ever wonder why I was so good at finding their operations? You were thorough, dedicated. You had excellent instincts for intelligence analysis. Louise smiled grimly. I was bait. My entire cover identity was designed to attract exactly this kind of attention. Silent Harbor wasn't the primary mission, Elena. It was the setup for something much larger. Elena's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. You're still active? The retirement was deep cover. This whole town, my job at the museum, my life here. It's all been waiting for them to surface again and make contact. Louise touched her communication device, sending a prearranged signal to the federal teams positioned around Millbrook. The files I kept weren't just insurance, she continued. They were bait. Sophisticated bait designed to draw out the entire network, including any government officials who might be compromised. As if responding to her signal, lights suddenly blazed from multiple positions around the bridge and the surrounding woods. FBI agents emerged from concealment, calling for surrender in multiple languages, while tactical teams moved to secure the area. Elena looked stricken as the full scope of Louise's deception became clear. You used me. I gave you every opportunity to walk away, Louise replied gently. Even now, if you surrender peacefully and provide information about the network's current operations, you can still choose a different path. The confrontation ended without violence. The network operatives, realizing they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered by professional law enforcement, surrendered according to standard protocols. Elena, faced with the choice between cooperation and prosecution as an accessory to criminal conspiracy, chose to provide detailed information about the network's reorganization. 2 weeks later, Louise stood in her museum office, carefully packing personal items into cardboard boxes. Agent Martinez watched from the doorway, having returned to oversee the final stages of the operation. So, this is really goodbye? Martinez asked. Louise Rose needs to disappear. Too many people know her face now, and her cover has been compromised beyond repair. Louise carefully wrapped a small ceramic piece that had been a gift from the Children's Museum program. But yes, my work here is finished. Where will you go? Louise smiled mysteriously. Somewhere quiet, maybe a small library in a mountain town, or perhaps a community college teaching art history. The possibilities are endless when you have access to the Federal Witness Protection Program's resources. Tom Bradley appeared in the doorway, looking concerned and confused. Louise, I don't understand what's happening, but the kids from Westfield Elementary sent this. He handed her a large card covered with colorful drawings and dozens of signatures. Louise opened it to find childish drawings of the museum, along with messages like, "Thank you for making history fun," and "You're the best museum, lady ever," and "Will you still be there when we come back?" For a moment, her professional composure cracked. These children had known her only as Louise the museum guide, and she had genuinely enjoyed sharing their enthusiasm for learning and discovery. "You really did care about this job," Martinez observed. "More than I expected," Louise admitted, her voice softer than Martinez had heard it during their professional interactions. "It's easy to forget that the normal world is what we're protecting when you spend too much time operating in shadows and deception." That evening, as Louise prepared to leave Millbrook forever, she took one last walk through the town that had been her home for 3 years. She passed the coffee shop where she had become a regular customer, past the small park where she had eaten lunch and read books on peaceful afternoons, past the library where she had spent quiet evenings researching local history that she had grown to genuinely appreciate. The town looked different in the evening light, softer somehow, as families finished dinner and children played in their yards before bedtime. Louise had forgotten how normal life could be when it wasn't constantly threatened by international conspiracies and criminal networks. At the museum, she left a detailed letter for her replacement, along with comprehensive notes about each exhibit and suggestions for improving the children's programs. Even in leaving, she wanted to ensure that the important work of education and historical preservation continued. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Martinez. "New identity documents ready. Report to Washington, D.C. for debriefing Monday morning." Louise typed back, "Understood. Thank you for your professionalism during this operation." As she drove out of Millbrook for the final time, Louise caught sight of the railway bridge in her rearview mirror. In 3 years, she had grown genuinely attached to this place in ways she hadn't expected when the assignment began. The quiet rhythms of small-town life, the genuine connections with people who had no hidden agendas beyond simple human kindness, the satisfaction of sharing knowledge with curious visitors, all of it had been more fulfilling than she had anticipated. But she also felt deep satisfaction in knowing that her patient work had eliminated a serious threat to national security. The network that had killed innocent people and corrupted government officials was finally broken. The files she had protected would ensure that justice was served and that the full scope of the conspiracy would be understood. Her phone rang as she reached the interstate highway. Unknown number, but the encryption pattern indicated a secure government line. Agent Walsh speaking. "Catherine, it's Director Harrison. Excellent work in Millbrook. The intelligence you gathered has already led to arrests in 4 countries and the seizure of weapons that would have been used in planned terrorist attacks." Louise felt the familiar satisfaction of a successful mission. What about Elena Vasquez? Full cooperation. She's provided details about the network's operations that we never could have obtained through other means. She'll be relocated under federal protection. Good. She's suffered enough for our cause. "We have a new assignment when you're ready," Director Harrison continued. Louise considered this for a moment, watching the miles pass outside her window. "What kind of assignment?" "Museum curator position at a small college in Colorado. We've received intelligence about unusual activities in the area that may be connected to a different criminal organization. Nothing urgent, but worth monitoring." Louise smiled at the consistency. "How's the local history?" "Rich mining heritage, fascinating geological formations, excellent opportunities for someone with your particular interests and expertise. Send me the details. As she drove through the night toward her new life and new identity, Louise reflected on the strange truth of her existence. She was most effective at protecting people when they had no idea she was protecting them. Her greatest successes would always be the disasters that never happened, the threats that were quietly eliminated before ordinary citizens even knew they existed. In a few months, she would be someone new again. A different name, a different background, but the same quiet dedication to keeping the world safe for people who just wanted to live their lives in peace, raise their children, and pursue their dreams without fear. Behind her, Millbrook settled into another peaceful night, its residents unaware that their friendly museum guide had been the only thing standing between them and a criminal network that would have used their town for terrible purposes. The local newspaper would run a small story about Louise Rose's sudden departure, citing a family emergency that required her immediate relocation. The museum board would begin searching for a replacement, and life would continue its normal rhythms. And somewhere ahead, another small town waited for a new resident who would seem perfectly ordinary while being anything but. The life of Louise Rose was ending, but the mission continued. Because some protectors work best when they remain invisible. Guardians who ask for no recognition and expect no thanks. In the darkness of the interstate, Louise drove toward her next identity, her next quiet life, her next opportunity to keep evil at bay while appearing to do nothing more remarkable than cataloging historical artifacts or teaching curious students about the past. 6 months later, Cedar Falls, Colorado, Dr. Sarah Mitchell arrived at the Rocky Mountain Heritage Museum at precisely 7:30 a.m., just as she had every day for the past 4 months. The mountain air was crisp and thin at this altitude, and snow dusted the peaks visible through her office window. She wore a simple wool sweater, practical khakis, and comfortable walking shoes, appropriate for someone who spent her days moving through exhibit halls and storage areas. The museum occupied a converted mining administration building from the 1890s, its red brick walls and tall windows perfectly suited to displaying the region's rich geological and cultural history. Sarah had fallen in love with the building during her interview, appreciating both its historical significance and its practical advantages for security purposes. "Morning, Sarah," called Jake Morrison, the facilities manager, as he unlocked the main entrance. Jake was a local man in his 50s who had worked at the museum for over a decade. He knew every pipe, wire, and creaking floorboard in the building. "Good morning, Jake. How did the heating system perform overnight?" "Rock solid. That new thermostat you recommended is working perfectly." Jake appreciated Sarah's attention to practical details that previous curators had often overlooked. Sarah smiled as she disarmed the security system and began her morning routine. The past 4 months had been peaceful, allowing her to settle into her new identity while genuinely enjoying the work of museum curation. The collection was impressive for a small institution, featuring mining equipment, Native American artifacts, geological specimens, and photographs documenting the region's transformation from wilderness to modern community. Her colleagues knew Dr. Sarah Mitchell as a former university professor who had left academia for the more hands-on work of museum management. Her doctoral thesis on Western American mining communities provided perfect cover for her extensive knowledge of industrial processes, metallurgy, and regional history. What they didn't know was that Dr. Mitchell's knowledge came from intelligence operations in mining regions across 3 continents, where she had posed as everyone from geological survey personnel to equipment sales representatives while tracking international smuggling operations. The morning proceeded normally until the first unusual visitor arrived at 10:15 a.m. A woman in expensive outdoor gear approached the information desk where Sarah was reviewing exhibition plans. "Excuse me. I'm looking for information about local mining claims from the 1970s and 80s, the woman said. She appeared to be in her early 40s, with the kind of deep tan that suggested extensive time outdoors. Her equipment was high-end but well used, consistent with someone who spent significant time in the field. "Certainly," Sarah replied with her usual helpful demeanor. "Are you researching a specific claim or looking for general information about mining activity during that period?" "I'm particularly interested in any uranium extraction operations that might have been active in this area." Sarah's internal alarm system activated immediately. Uranium mining was a sensitive topic that attracted attention from various criminal organizations interested in radioactive materials. However, she maintained her professional composure. "We have some records in our research archive, though uranium extraction wasn't as significant in this region as gold and silver mining. Most of the uranium activity was concentrated further south. May I ask what specific information you're hoping to find?" The woman, who had introduced herself as Dr. Rebecca Hayes from a geological consulting firm, explained that she was conducting an environmental impact assessment for a proposed development project. Her credentials appeared legitimate, and her questions demonstrated genuine knowledge of mining operations and environmental regulations. However, Sarah noticed subtle details that suggested additional training beyond geological consulting. Dr. Hayes positioned herself to observe both the entrance and the staff areas while they spoke. Her questions about uranium mining included inquiries about transportation routes and storage facilities that seemed beyond the scope of environmental assessment. "I'll need to check our archive index," Sarah said. "Could you return this afternoon? I should have a better idea of what materials might be relevant to your research." After Dr. Hayes left, Sarah made her way to the museum's basement storage area, ostensibly to search for historical records. In reality, she was activating communication protocols she had established during her first week in Cedar Falls. The basement housed thousands of artifacts in climate-controlled storage, along with research materials dating back to the museum's founding in 1923. Sarah had spent considerable time familiarizing herself with the collection, both for legitimate curatorial purposes and to create secure locations for emergency equipment. From a concealed compartment behind a display case of mining tools, she retrieved a communication device and sent a coded message to her handler in Washington. The message indicated potential security concerns requiring investigation, but not immediate backup. The response came within 30 minutes. "Acknowledged. Monitor situation. Support available if needed." Sarah returned to her normal duties, but with heightened awareness of her environment and visitors. The museum's afternoon schedule included a group tour for local high school students studying Colorado history, along with several individual visitors researching family genealogy. At 2:30 p.m., Dr. Hayes returned as promised. Sarah had prepared copies of relevant historical documents, including maps showing documented mining claims and transportation routes from the 1970s and 80s. "I found several references to uranium prospecting in the area," Sarah explained, spreading the documents on a research table. "However, most of the activity was exploratory rather than actual extraction. The geological surveys indicated uranium concentrations weren't economically viable for large-scale mining." Dr. Hayes studied the materials carefully, making notes and occasionally asking for clarification about specific locations or time periods. Her questions remained within the bounds of legitimate environmental research, but Sarah noticed that she paid particular attention to transportation routes and facility locations. "This is very helpful, Doctor," Hayes said finally. "Would it be possible to get copies of these maps and survey reports?" "Certainly. Our copying fee is 50 cents per page, and I'll need you to sign a research agreement acknowledging that these materials are for academic or professional use only. As Dr. Hayes completed the paperwork, Sarah observed her handwriting and signature, noting details that might be useful for later verification of her identity. After providing the requested copies, Sarah watched Dr. Hayes leave the museum and walk to a late-model SUV parked across the street. The vehicle had Colorado plates, but Sarah noticed that it bore rental company markings. The rest of the afternoon proceeded without incident. Sarah completed her curatorial work, assisted visitors with research requests, and prepared for the next day's activities. However, she made mental notes of all visitors and their stated purposes for future reference. That evening, Sarah drove to her apartment in downtown Cedar Falls, a small one-bedroom unit above an antique shop that provided both convenience and security advantages. The location allowed her to observe street activity while maintaining the lifestyle appropriate for a museum curator's salary. As she prepared dinner, Sarah reflected on the day's events. Dr. Hayes might represent a legitimate environmental consulting project, but the focus on uranium mining and transportation routes suggested other possibilities. Radioactive materials remained a constant concern for national security agencies, and any unusual interest in former uranium operations warranted careful monitoring. Her phone rang as she finished eating. The caller ID showed a local number. Dr. Mitchell, this is Rebecca Hayes. I wanted to thank you again for your help today. I was wondering if you might be available to show me some of the actual sites referenced in those historical documents. I'd be happy to compensate you for your time as a consulting fee. Sarah considered the request carefully. Field trips to historical sites were a normal part of her job, and refusing might seem suspicious. However, the invitation also represented a potential security risk. I'd be happy to help, she replied. When were you thinking of conducting the site visit? Tomorrow afternoon, if possible. I know it's short notice, but my project timeline is quite tight. Let me check my schedule and get back to you in the morning. Some of those mining sites are on private property, so I'll need to make arrangements with the current landowners. After ending the call, Sarah immediately contacted her handler in Washington, providing details about Dr. Hayes' request and her own assessment of the potential security implications. The response was swift. Proceed with caution. Local FBI office has been notified. Backup will be positioned discreetly during any field activities. Sarah spent the evening researching Dr. Hayes' consulting firm and the environmental impact project she had mentioned. The company appeared legitimate, with an established track record and appropriate professional credentials. However, some of the personnel listings seemed inconsistent with typical consulting firm staffing. The next morning brought unexpected developments. As Sarah unlocked the museum, she noticed a man in casual outdoor clothing examining the building's exterior with unusual attention to security cameras and entrance points. When she greeted him as he approached the front door, he identified himself as Mark Stevens, a freelance photographer working on a book about Colorado's mining heritage. He requested permission to photograph some of the museum's exterior and interior spaces. I'm particularly interested in the relationship between historical mining operations and the modern landscape, he explained, showing her a portfolio of professional photography that documented industrial archaeology sites throughout the West. His work was impressive, but Sarah noticed that many of his photographs focused on infrastructure details that would be useful for security assessment rather than artistic or historical documentation. I'd be happy to arrange a photography session, Sarah replied. We do require advance notice for commercial photography, and there are restrictions on photographing certain sensitive artifacts. Stevens seemed disappointed by the delay, but accepted her requirement for proper scheduling. After he left, Sarah made note of his license plate and physical description. The morning's third unusual visitor arrived at 11 a.m. An elderly man wearing a veteran's cap approached the information desk with what appeared to be a routine genealogy request. "My name is Frank Morrison," he said, "and I'm trying to trace my family's connection to mining operations in this area during the 1940s. Sarah helped him access genealogical records and local newspapers from the relevant time period. However, she noticed that his questions gradually shifted toward military activities and government projects rather than family history. "Were there any government mining operations during World War II?" he asked. "I heard there might have been some kind of strategic mineral extraction for the war effort." Sarah provided general historical information about wartime mining activities while carefully monitoring the direction of his inquiries. Strategic mineral extraction during World War II could include uranium mining for the Manhattan Project, information that remained sensitive for national security reasons. By lunchtime, Sarah had received visits from 3 individuals, all with legitimate covers, but demonstrating unusual interest in uranium mining, facility security, or wartime government operations. The pattern was too obvious to be coincidental. During her lunch break, Sarah walked to the small park behind the museum to make a secure phone call to her handler. "We have a developing situation," she reported. "Multiple individuals with questionable interests have made contact within 18 hours. Request immediate assessment and potential intervention." "Understood. How do you want to proceed with the afternoon field trip?" Sarah considered her options. Canceling might alert potential threats that she was aware of surveillance, but proceeding could expose her to additional risks. "I'll proceed as planned, but I want full backup and surveillance. If this is what I think it is, we need to understand the scope of their operation." That afternoon, Dr. Hayes arrived promptly at 2 p.m. for their scheduled site visit. She had changed into hiking boots and field clothes appropriate for visiting remote mining locations. "I've arranged access to 3 sites that match your research parameters," Sarah explained as they walked to her SUV. "The first is about 20 minutes from town, and it includes some of the best preserved mining infrastructure from the 1970s. As they drove through the mountains, Dr. Hayes asked detailed questions about the geological formations and the history of mining claims in the area. Her knowledge seemed consistent with legitimate environmental consulting, but Sarah noted that she paid particular attention to road conditions and alternate routes. The first site was an abandoned copper mine that had operated intermittently from the 1950s through the 1980s. The location included surface structures, mine entrances, and a small processing facility that had been partially demolished when the operation closed. "This is perfect, Doctor," Hayes said, photographing the structures and making detailed notes about their condition and accessibility. "Were there any uranium extraction activities associated with this site?" "Not that I'm aware of," Sarah replied truthfully. "The geological surveys I've seen indicate copper and molybdenum were the primary targets here." However, Sarah noticed that Dr. Hayes spent considerable time examining areas that would have been suitable for storing radioactive materials, including a concrete building that had housed electrical equipment. As they explored the site, Sarah became aware of movement in the surrounding forest. At least 2 individuals were positioned to observe their activities while remaining concealed from Dr. Hayes. The second site was located deeper in the mountains, accessible only by a rough dirt road that wound through dense forest. Dr. Hayes seemed particularly interested in this location, asking detailed questions about property ownership and public access rights. "This area has such a remote feel," Dr. Hayes commented as they hiked toward the mine entrance. "I imagine very few people visit these sites nowadays." "The current landowner is quite protective of the property," Sarah replied. "He allows research access but doesn't encourage casual visitors." What Sarah didn't mention was that the landowner was actually a retired federal agent who had been notified of their visit and was currently observing their activities from a concealed position. At the mine entrance, Dr. Hayes produced sophisticated electronic equipment that she claimed was necessary for environmental assessment. However, Sarah recognized some of the devices as radiation detection equipment, far more advanced than typically used for standard environmental surveys. "Are you expecting to find radioactive contamination?" Sarah asked casually. "It's standard procedure when assessing any site with potential uranium exposure," Dr. Hayes replied, but her answer seemed rehearsed rather than spontaneous. As Dr. Hayes conducted her environmental assessment, Sarah noticed that her equipment readings seemed to be detecting something significant. Dr. Hayes's expression changed subtly, suggesting that she had found whatever she was looking for. "This has been very productive, Doctor," Hayes said finally, packing her equipment with obvious satisfaction. "I think I have everything I need for my report." On the drive back to town, Dr. Hayes seemed more relaxed and talkative, asking questions about Sarah's background and her decision to leave university teaching for museum work. "It must be quite a change of pace," Dr. Hayes commented. "Do you miss the excitement of academic research?" "I find museum work surprisingly engaging," Sarah replied. "Every day brings different challenges and opportunities to learn something new." What she didn't add was that museum work provided excellent cover for the kind of challenges she actually faced in her real profession. After returning Dr. Hayes to the museum, Sarah immediately contacted her handler to report the day's observations. "She found something at the second site," Sarah reported. "Her equipment detected radiation levels that excited her considerably. Whatever she's looking for, I think she may have found it." "Understood. We're moving to the next phase of surveillance. How do you want to handle any follow-up contact?" Sarah considered the situation carefully. "I think she'll be back. Whatever she detected, she'll want to return with additional equipment or personnel. I recommend maintaining my cover and gathering as much intelligence as possible about her associates and their objectives." That evening, as Sarah prepared for what she suspected would be an eventful next few days, she reflected on the strange consistency of her career. Once again, she was a quiet professional, working in a peaceful community while dealing with threats that most people could never imagine. The museum provided the same kind of satisfaction she had found in Millbrook, the opportunity to engage with genuine history and education while serving her country in ways that would never be publicly recognized. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Thank you for an excellent day. Looking forward to continuing our work together." Sarah smiled grimly as she recognized the message pattern from her previous operation. Whatever Dr. Hayes and her associates were planning, they had made the same mistake as the network in Millbrook. They had underestimated the quiet woman who appeared to be nothing more than a dedicated museum professional. But this time, Sarah was ready from the beginning. The next few days would determine whether Colorado would remain peaceful or become the site of another invisible battle between those who sought to exploit dangerous materials and those who stood quietly in their way. Outside her window, the mountain peaks caught the last light of sunset, beautiful and serene. Soon, those same mountains might hide activities that threatened national security. But for now, they simply reminded Sarah why places like this were worth protecting. The quiet guardian was ready for whatever came next. 3 days later, the phone call came at 3:47 a.m., jarring Sarah from deep sleep with the particular urgency that intelligence professionals learn to recognize immediately. "Dr. Mitchell, this is Agent Torres from the FBI Denver office. We need you to meet us at the museum immediately. We have a developing situation." Sarah was fully alert within seconds, her training overriding any lingering drowsiness. What kind of situation? Multiple individuals were observed conducting unauthorized activities at the mining site you visited 3 days ago. We believe they're attempting to extract materials that pose significant security risks. Sarah dressed quickly in dark clothes suitable for potential fieldwork and drove through the empty streets of Cedar Falls to the museum. 3 federal vehicles were parked discreetly around the building, and she could see additional personnel positioned at strategic locations. Agent Carlos Torres was a compact man in his 40s, with the kind of watchful eyes that missed nothing. He met Sarah at the museum's rear entrance, showing credentials that indicated significant experience with national security cases. Dr. Mitchell, thank you for responding so quickly. We need your expertise regarding the sites you showed Dr. Hayes and your assessment of what they might have been looking for. Sarah led him to the museum's conference room, where maps and photographs from her site visit were spread across the table. What exactly did your surveillance teams observe? 3 vehicles arrived at the second mining site around midnight, Torres explained. 8 individuals with sophisticated excavation equipment, radiation detection gear, and what appeared to be containment units suitable for transporting radioactive materials. Sarah studied the surveillance photographs Torres provided. Dr. Hayes was clearly visible directing the operation, along with several individuals she didn't recognize. However, one face made her pause. "This man," she said, pointing to a figure in tactical clothing. "I've seen him before." "Where?" Sarah's memory was working through databases of faces from her previous operations. Marcus Volkov. He was involved in the Millbrook situation 6 months ago. Torres frowned, making notes. That suggests this isn't an isolated operation. What could they be looking for at that specific site? Sarah opened her laptop and accessed geological survey data that she had researched during her first weeks in Cedar Falls. During World War II, this entire region was surveyed for strategic minerals. Most of the uranium was extracted for the Manhattan Project, but some smaller deposits were deemed uneconomical and left undisturbed. Until now. Exactly. Modern extraction techniques make previously uneconomical deposits viable, especially if someone isn't concerned with environmental regulations or legal mining permits. Torres showed her additional surveillance photographs. They're not just extracting materials. They've established what appears to be a processing facility in a remote valley about 10 miles from the main mining site. Sarah examined the images with growing concern. The facility included mobile processing units, power generation equipment, and transportation vehicles capable of moving heavy materials over rough terrain. "This is more sophisticated than anything we dealt with in Millbrook," she observed. "They're not just stealing materials, they're refining them on site." For what purpose? Sarah's experience with international criminal networks provided several disturbing possibilities. Refined uranium can be used for nuclear weapons, dirty bombs, or sold to terrorist organizations. The processing facility suggests they're planning large-scale operations. Torres's radio crackled with an urgent update from the surveillance teams. "Agent Torres, we have additional activity at the processing site, multiple vehicles arriving, and they appear to be preparing for some kind of major operation." "What's your assessment, Dr. Mitchell?" Torres asked. "How much time do we have before this becomes a critical threat?" Sarah considered the tactical implications. If they're processing uranium ore into weapons-grade material, every hour of operation increases the danger. We need to shut this down immediately. The problem is jurisdiction and evidence. They're on private property, and we need to be able to prove criminal intent rather than legitimate mining activity. Sarah smiled grimly. "I think I can help with that." Dr. Hayes specifically asked about uranium mining, and her equipment yesterday detected radiation levels that excited her. She wasn't conducting environmental assessment. She was confirming the presence of materials she already knew were there. "You think this was planned in advance?" "I think someone provided them with detailed intelligence about uranium deposits in this area, possibly including classified geological surveys from the Manhattan Project era." Torres made additional calls to coordinate with federal agencies, while Sarah prepared detailed maps showing the relationship between the historical mining sites and the current processing facility. "Agent Torres," she said when he finished his communications, "I have a suggestion about how to handle this situation." "I'm listening." They think doctor. Mitchell is a legitimate museum curator who inadvertently helped them locate their target materials. I can approach Dr. Hayes with a cover story about discovering additional historical documents that might be relevant to her research. Torres looked skeptical. That puts you directly in harm's way. It also gives us an opportunity to gather intelligence about their operation and potentially document their criminal activities. Sarah opened her secure communication device and displayed a message from her handler in Washington. "I've been authorized to take whatever action is necessary to resolve this situation." Torres read the message and nodded slowly. "What do you need from us?" "Full tactical support, surveillance, and backup position to intervene if the situation escalates. I'll approach Dr. Hayes this morning with information about additional uranium-related historical documents that I've supposedly discovered in the museum archives. And if she asks you to visit the processing facility?" Sarah checked her equipment bag, ensuring that she had recording devices, communication gear, and defensive tools appropriate for the situation. "Then we'll have everything we need to shut down their operation and arrest everyone involved." By 8 a.m., Sarah was back at the museum, following her normal routine while federal agents positioned themselves around Cedar Falls. To any casual observer, it appeared to be another quiet morning in a small mountain town. Dr. Hayes called at 9:30, exactly as Sarah had anticipated. "Dr. Mitchell, I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to thank you again for yesterday's site visit. It was incredibly productive." "Actually, I'm glad you called," Sarah replied, following her prepared script. "I discovered some additional documents in our archives that might be relevant to your research. They include detailed geological surveys from the 1940s that weren't in the collection I showed you initially." There was a pause that lasted several seconds longer than normal conversation rhythm. "What kind of documents?" "Government surveys related to strategic mineral extraction during World War II. They include detailed maps and assay reports for several sites in this area." "Would it be possible to examine those documents today?" "Of course. I'll have them ready whenever you can come in." Dr. Hayes arrived within 30 minutes, moving with the kind of urgency that confirmed Sarah's assessment of the situation. She was accompanied by a man who introduced himself as her research assistant, but whose bearing suggested military or security training. "These documents are remarkable," Dr. Hayes said after examining the materials Sarah had prepared. The documents were genuine historical records, but Sarah had selected specific items that would be particularly valuable for someone planning uranium extraction operations. "I'm curious," Sarah said casually, "have your environmental assessments identified any areas of concern?" Dr. Hayes and her companion exchanged glances before she answered. "We've found some interesting readings that warrant further investigation. In fact, I was wondering if you might be willing to provide additional consulting assistance." "What kind of assistance?" "We're planning a more comprehensive survey of the area, including some sites that aren't accessible by normal vehicles. Your knowledge of the historical context would be invaluable." Sarah appeared to consider the request carefully. "When are you planning this survey?" "This afternoon, if possible. I know it's short notice, but our project timeline has been accelerated." Sarah agreed to accompany them, knowing that federal agents would be monitoring every moment of the operation. As they prepared to leave the museum, she made a point of telling her colleagues that she would be conducting a research expedition and might not return until late evening. The drive to the processing facility took them deep into the mountains on roads that grew progressively more remote and difficult. Sarah noted the route carefully while maintaining her cover as an academic consultant interested in historical mining operations. "This is quite an operation you have here," Sarah commented as they arrived at a valley containing multiple temporary structures, vehicles, and equipment that clearly exceeded the scope of environmental consulting. "We believe in thorough research," Dr. Hayes replied, but her tone had shifted to something less friendly than during their previous interactions. Sarah was escorted to a command tent, where several individuals were examining geological samples and monitoring radiation detection equipment. The scale and sophistication of the operation confirmed her worst fears about their intentions. "Dr. Mitchell," said a man who appeared to be in charge of the facility. "Doctor. Hayes tells me you've been very helpful with historical information about uranium deposits in this area." "I'm always happy to support legitimate research," Sarah replied, noting that the man's accent suggested Eastern European origins. "Excellent. We have some questions about the original extraction methods used during World War II. Specifically, we're interested in how much material was left behind when the government operations concluded." Sarah provided general historical information while carefully observing the facility's layout, security measures, and personnel. She counted at least 15 individuals, multiple vehicles capable of transporting heavy materials, and processing equipment that could refine significant quantities of uranium ore. As the afternoon progressed, it became clear that the operation was preparing for a major extraction and processing effort. Sarah documented as much information as possible using concealed recording equipment while maintaining her cover as a helpful academic consultant. The situation changed dramatically when one of the facility's guards approached the command tent with obvious urgency. "Sir, we have federal vehicles approaching on the access road, multiple units moving fast." The facility commander immediately began issuing orders for evacuation and evidence destruction. Sarah realized that the federal intervention she had requested was arriving ahead of schedule. "Dr. Mitchell," Dr. Hayes said, her friendly demeanor completely gone, "I think you may have been less than honest about your background and interests." Before Sarah could respond, the valley filled with the sound of helicopters and the sight of federal agents moving to surround the facility. Loudspeakers began announcing that everyone present was under arrest and should surrender immediately. The next few minutes were controlled chaos as the criminal organization attempted to resist arrest while destroying evidence of their uranium processing operation. Sarah took cover behind a vehicle and activated her emergency communication device to coordinate with the federal response teams. The confrontation ended with the arrest of 17 individuals, the seizure of significant quantities of processed uranium, and the disruption of what investigators would later determine was a sophisticated international operation aimed at producing materials for nuclear weapons. Dr. Hayes, whose real name was Elena Kozlov, proved to be a former Soviet nuclear engineer who had been selling technical expertise to criminal organizations for over a decade. Marcus Volkov was indeed the same individual from the Millbrook operation, confirming that Sarah's quiet work was attracting attention from international criminal networks. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in her museum office, once again packing personal belongings into boxes. The successful conclusion of the uranium processing operation had compromised her cover beyond any possibility of repair. Agent Torres, who had become something of a friend during the investigation, watched her pack with obvious regret. "It seems like a shame," he said. "You really did excellent work here, both as a curator and as an intelligence operative." "The two jobs aren't as different as people might think," Sarah replied, carefully wrapping a geological specimen that had been a gift from a visiting school group. "Both involve preserving important things and sharing knowledge with people who can use it constructively." "Where will you go next?" Sarah smiled mysteriously. "Somewhere quiet, where I can continue both kinds of work. maybe a small historical society in New England, or perhaps a cultural center on a Native American reservation. Her phone buzzed with a message from her handler. New assignment available. Historical librarian position in Maine coastal town. Situation requires monitoring, but no immediate action anticipated. Sarah typed back, "Sounds perfect. When do I start?" As she drove away from Cedar Falls for the last time, Sarah reflected on the strange satisfaction of her double life. She had genuinely enjoyed curating the museum's collection and helping visitors understand the region's fascinating history. At the same time, she had successfully prevented dangerous materials from falling into the hands of people who would use them to harm innocent civilians. The mountains of Colorado disappeared in her rearview mirror as she drove toward her next identity and her next opportunity to serve her country, while appearing to be nothing more than a dedicated professional who loved books, history, and helping people learn about the past. Behind her, Cedar Falls returned to its peaceful routines, its residents unaware that their museum curator had been the key figure in preventing a nuclear terrorism plot that could have had devastating consequences. And somewhere ahead, another small town waited for a new resident who would seem perfectly ordinary, while quietly watching for threats that most people could never imagine. The work was never finished, but that was exactly why it mattered. Some heroes never reveal themselves. They simply show up, do what needs to be done, and disappear again, leaving behind only the safety they have provided and the peace they have preserved. Sarah Mitchell had been one of those heroes. Tomorrow, someone new would take her place. The cycle would continue, as it always had, as it always must. In the shadows and in plain sight, the quiet guardians kept watch, and the world remained safe because of it. Epilogue. 5 years later, a small article appeared on page 6 of the Cedar Falls Mountain Gazette. The Rocky Mountain Heritage Museum announced this week that it has received a significant anonymous donation to establish the Dr. Sarah Mitchell Memorial Collection, focusing on Colorado mining history and environmental conservation. Museum director Jake Morrison noted that Dr. Mitchell, who served as curator from 2018 to 2019, had made lasting contributions to the institution's educational programs before relocating due to family circumstances. The collection will include interactive exhibits designed to help children understand the relationship between historical mining operations and modern environmental stewardship. In a small coastal town in Maine, a librarian named Margaret Rose read the article online and smiled quietly before returning to her work cataloging historical documents about 19th century shipping routes. Some legacies, she reflected, were worth preserving in more ways than one. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most. And where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.